Hey guys, how are you? So we're going to talk about immunology as it pertains to microbiology, okay? So I'm going to talk about active immunity versus passive immunity. Active immunity is whatever it sounds like. Active, you do something to protect yourself. Immunity, you make those antibodies. It costs energy. You have to do work, so we call it active. Passive immunity, you don't have to do anything. Passive is a gift of some sort. You don't do anything. Active immunity, you make your antibodies. Passive immunity, you get your antibodies from Amazon.com. We'll see what that Amazon is in a few, okay? Active immunity, you made them. You went out there and made them. Well, you don't have to go anywhere. Your body makes them. Simple, right? Easy. Okay. So active immunity can be of two types. It can be naturally acquired, or it can be artificially acquired. Okay. Naturally acquired means you acquire it because you get an infection of some sort that is natural. A human has nothing to do with it. So, for example, getting a real disease. Okay. So, for example, in natural acquired immunity, a person catches a virus, let's say hepatitis B virus, becomes sick and recovers, period. Naturally, why do we say naturally? Because human did not make them. Nature, God, whatever you believe in. Okay. Okay. That's natural acquired active immunity. And what about artificially acquired active immunity? In artificially acquired active immunity, let's give you an example. So if someone has a natural acquired active immunity, catches hepatitis B virus, becomes sick and recovers, right? What really happens is that that patient gets, let's say this is hepatitis B virus. Somehow hepatitis B virus enters that body. You know, doesn't matter how, we don't care right now. Patient becomes sick and recovers. But how does that patient recover? The body takes that whole hepatitis B virus, chops it up three-dimensionally, all the way possible, and obviously makes millions of antigens, right? Or a few antigens, hundreds, 5, 1, 2. In this case, many antigens. And what the body does is that to each of those antigens, it makes an antibody. Okay? So this is a virus, body chops it up, makes antibodies to each one of those antigens and recovers. That's active, natural active. Now, let's talk about artificially active. We said artificial active means what? Something to do with a human. So what happens is that humans have looked at, for example, hepatitis B virus, okay? And a scientist back in 1950s actually won a Nobel Prize for it, okay? He found out that it's one particular antigen, and you will have to know it later on, so I might say it as well, surface antigen that truly matters. So all of these chopped up antigens, if you only inject the patient with the surface antibody generator, the body would actively make antibodies against that surface antigen. But what's really cool is that antibody is enough to protect against hepatitis B virus. What am I trying to say? Let's say we chop up hepatitis B into 3 antigens, just random simplification, okay? One of them is surface antigen. I don't care if I have the other two or not. If I have a production of that surface antigen antibody, I would be protected. I don't need the other two antibodies. The point is this: when you get the real virus, you make antibodies against all three. Well, there are more than three, but you just think all three, okay? Okay, so what did we decide to do, or what did the science lead to? We just took that surface antigen and injected into the patient, into a healthy person, right? Not the patient. The healthy patient, person, actively made antibodies against that surface antigen. And when exposed to a complete virus, that patient never ever got sick. Okay, that's called vaccination. We chop up the disease-causing entity, okay, and find out which one of those parts that does not cause a disease, when injected, forces in the body production of antibodies that are protective, okay? So, in case of hepatitis B, it's surface antigen antibody, okay? IgG against the surface antigen, okay? So if I were to only inject surface antigen into the patient, that patient would, into a healthy patient, person, that person would never catch the real disease, even if you expose him to the whole virus, okay? So in artificially acquired immunity, a person essentially gets vaccinated against particular disease, okay? We just give him or her a part of the disease-causing pathogen, and that part causes production of protective antibodies, okay? So what happens is that the body then produces immune memory for that specific pathogen, right? And that's it. Next time when the real deal happens, if the real deal happens, the body immediately makes antibodies, okay? And that's it, person is protected. So just remember, because many students make this mistake, vaccination results in artificial, because you made the vaccine. Who makes the vaccine? The companies make the vaccine, right? Active immunity, okay? And a patient who, for example, what kind of an example can you give? Hepatitis B, or a patient who contracts, for example, a strain of flu, right? Will always have an immunity against that particular strain of flu, right? Flu, as you know, changes all the time, so it's kind of difficult to be protected, because next year it's going to be a different flu, right? Or after 2 years. But catching a flu is an example of natural active immunity, okay? That's why natural immunity is always better than artificial immunity. Vaccination can never be as good as catching the real deal. Obviously, sometimes the real deal is something nobody wants to catch because it's very dangerous, right? But anyone, for example, who had a real deal has been exposed to all of the antigens that are possible. Okay, that patient has memory cells with all of those antibody producing genes, okay? But second best, and indeed the first best, is the vaccination, because obviously you don't want to get sick. But there are certain, this is just for your pediatrics, you know, in childhood diseases, there is a disease, for example, rubella, right? German measles. Rubella is not dangerous if you catch it as a kid. Rubella is very dangerous if, for example, the lady who never had rubella gets pregnant, the baby would be affected, right? So, but kids, you just get rubella tomorrow, you know, and that's it. Okay, not a big deal. Okay, there are many diseases like that where kids are essentially not affected. Okay, I mean, look at how COVID affects very elderly, and look at what COVID does to kids. Essentially nothing. Okay, so age differences. Okay, so natural acquired active, artificially acquired active. Now let's look over passive. Okay, passive has naturally acquired and artificially acquired. But as I said, it's passive. You're just sitting there doing nothing. And, you know, it rains luck on you. What is luck? In naturally acquired passive immunity, what would be an example? Naturally acquired passive would be, for example, a baby, an infant, receiving breast milk from his or her mother. That breast milk contains antibodies that are protective. What a gift. The baby, namely, does not make antibodies. Adaptive immunity in a baby is very undeveloped, okay? And mom essentially protects that babies with her antibodies, okay? Passively, baby just gets a donation of those antibodies, okay? That's why we need to protect our moms and love them so much, okay? Because they've been protecting us ever since we're born, okay? So natural acquired passive immunity, an infant, for example, receives breast milk, okay? What is artificially acquired passive immunity? That's something relatively new, That's when we have antibodies that are made by humans, okay, or cultured in some way, okay, cultured, you know, we use cells for that, we use, there are many ways, okay? This is a relatively new development, anti-biological medication, biologicals, and you'll be studying some of them. It's an up-and-coming pharmacological treatment that is very expensive as it stands and has been around for like more than 5 to 10 years already, but it's relatively new and very expensive, and therefore not very commonly applied outside of you know, most very developed countries. Okay, it's that rare. Okay, so in artificially acquired passive immunity, a person receives antibodies via injection. Okay, directly, so we can get those antibodies filtered from a plasma of a person who got the disease already. That's possible. You know, they tried to do it for COVID. That's a way. Okay, so a patient who receives the, you know, for example, intramuscular injection, right, containing antibodies from individual who already had that disease, is receiving that artificial passive immunity. Okay, that's it. Simple. Active, passive, natural, active. You made antibodies to a disease that's out there in nature. Artificial active, you made antibodies to the vaccine. That's it. Passive, natural, mommy protects the baby. Artificial, you get those antibodies made by companies. Okay, let's just simplify that like that. Just remember, we're talking about adaptive immune response here. You know that B cells are responsible for that, right? They make plasma cells. We make plasma cells make antibodies. B cells that don't need to make plasma cells because infection has left the building. They make memory cells. Those memory cells are always ready to restart antibody production life. So, okay, very important. B cells are the cells responsible for adaptive immunity, in this case, antibody production, therefore humoral immunity. And you need to know that how do they do it? They break down the antigen, the big antigen, for example, hepatitis B virus, and present it to the T cells. Okay, that's what we call these cells antigen presenting cells. That means they present like so. Okay, present. Okay, so that's something that you need to know. Let's talk about the innate immune system for a little while. So what are the parts of the innate immune system? Skin, all the protective barriers like skin here, mucosa inside, right? Common sense, right? Mucosa goes into the intestines, urogenital tract, respiratory tract, skin, mucosa, normal flora, acidity of the stomach. They're all protective barriers of the innate immune system, okay? So even tears, tears can be part of that first line of defense: skin, respiratory mucosa, tears, whatever. Okay. Okay. So how does skin, for example, protect you? In addition to just being a physical barrier, well, it can secrete fatty acids. Those fatty acids are harmful to certain, create conditions that are not good for bacteria, for example, right? They're protected, okay? They form a protective barrier by making the skin more acidic, okay? pH goes down, acidic, okay? What about the respiratory tract? What is its mechanism of how it protects itself innately? Well, it has cilia. Those cells in the respiratory tract have the hair-like projections that are equivalent in length, right? We call them cilia, right? In addition to that, there are cells that produce mucus, right? So cilia and mucus, it's a barrier. You can envelope that bug, whatever it is, a virus, a bacterium with mucus, and cilia beat in tandem and push it toward the outside, then you cuff it up and that's it, right? So you're protected. Your respiratory tract is protected. That was your skin, that's your respiratory tract. What about the urine? Flushing of urine would be a protection, certainly. It's a, believe it or not, something so regular, it's a part of your natural barrier to entry. Flushing of urine, it's a protection against infection, okay? Most common cause of urinary tract infections is E. coli. You need to remember, coli simply means of the colon. Colon means large intestine. So coli is Greek for of the colon, right? So E. coli, Escherichia coli, found in the colon is the most common cause of urinary tract infections, okay? And by the way, don't forget, in association to that acidity of the skin, the pH, right? Don't forget that bacteria generally like a neutral pH. Neutral means what? 7, right? So 6.5 to 7.5. Think that range, okay? 6.5 to 7.5. So anything outside of that, there are other bacteria that may actually prefer that, but on the whole, we're talking about a good chunk of bacteria that are potentially harmful that cannot practice their art of harming us. Okay, so obviously, currently, most popular theory about how why females get a urinary tract infection most commonly always include the length of the urethra. You need to always answer that males have longer urethras, and so they're less likely to get those urinary tract infections. As a second answer, you may see anogenital proximity, right? The proximity of the vagina to the anus. That may be on your questions as well. If you ever see urethral length, pick that one. If you see anogenital proximity, pick the anogenital proximity. And I'm talking about end class, okay? And core classes, okay? So don't ever say that I told you to pick anogenital proximity first, okay? Because you wanna go, maybe someone will go ahead and do a randomized controlled double-blind studies, but it's going to be very expensive, and studies are technically done that give us financial benefits. Someone has to be interested in doing that study. But let's focus on our exam, okay? Let's focus on our course. Let's focus on your lecture. So, okay, so let's say, so I just mentioned skin. I just mentioned normal flora, mucosa, acidity of the stomach. These are all protective barriers, right? But let's say a pathogen has broken through that initial line of defense, okay? Let's say skin and mucosa, right? Initial line of defense. Then it encounters the innate immune system's response, okay? And the cells of the innate immune response like to eat. And so we call them cells that like to eat, phagocytes, because phagein is to eat in Greek, okay? So phagocytic cells, and they're all white blood cells. Red blood cells aren't involved in this immune response. So leukocyte is a white blood cell, leukocyte, white blood cell, leukos is white, cyte is a cell. So we now call these cells phagocytic leukocytes. Okay, what are the examples? The biggest examples would be neutrophil, the most common white blood cell, right? Also macrophages, right? Neutrophils and macrophages are important examples. And what unites all these phagocytic leukocytes is that they all have increased number of cellular organelles called lysosomes. And if you remember from your biology, lysosomes contain enzymes, right? They are essentially cellular trash cans, okay? That contains those enzymes that destroy digested bacteria. How so? Well, the cell, what does it do first? Let me turn it off. So here is a cell membrane, right? The bacterium or virus approaches. What does the cell do? Phagocytosis, the strangula, right? So the membrane wraps around it and then pinches off and goes into the cytoplasm, where what happens to that little bubble containing the bacterium or the virus? It unites with an organelle called lysosome, which contains all those lysosomal enzymes, right? Those two unite, they become one, right? Their membranes unite, become one. And what happens then? Those enzymes break down all of those bacteria, all of those viruses into small pieces. That's how you make those little antigens, right? And then if necessary, for example, the B cell would do what? It's an antigen presenting cell. So what does it do? It takes one single antigen and shows it to the T cells, right? That's one way to do it, right? But we're talking about innate immune system. So just engulf and destroy, okay? So just remember that there is a term, phagocytosis. Don't confuse it with pinocytosis. That's a smaller phagocytosis, okay? But basically, whatever pinocytosis or phagocytosis, you make that little compartment with extracellular material, bacteria, viruses, whatever it is outside, and that little membrane cocoon around it essentially pinches off into the cytoplasm of the cell. Talking about our own cells, okay? So, so we have macrophages within our tissues, and as you know from your anatomy classes, macrophages are made from monocytes in blood, right? So this system of fixed macrophages in tissues, and different tissues have different kinds of macrophages. You know, liver has Kupffer cells, brain has microglia, Langerhans cells in skin, and so on, okay? So these tissue macrophages and circulating monocytes, these are all phagocytes that engulf those foreign bodies, foreign substances, bacteria, viruses, whatever we consider foreign, and together they're called mononuclear phagocytic system. Okay. So after these cells engulf a foreign body, there is a potential for an inflammatory response. And that happens when, for example, macrophages secrete, and you've read it in your weekly reviews, right? Interleukin 1, interleukin 6, IL-1, IL-6, TNF-alpha, IL-12, all those interleukins or tumor necrosis factors, okay? Just remember that innate immunity involves inflammation, inflammatory response, inflammation, okay? Okay. Just to clarify that our past understanding used to be that neutrophils, basophils, and eosinophils, which are granulocytes, I told you to remember them as BEN, basophils, eosinophils, neutrophils. I want to mention neutrophils first because they're the most common phagocytic leukocyte, right? In the past, we used to think that they don't present antigens, that they're not antigen presenting cells to the T cells, right? We now think otherwise, okay? But, you know, you may be reading old literature, don't get confused, okay? It takes a little while to change the latest information to update it in books, okay? So just remember what normal flora is. You know, normal flora, I was showing you the pictures. Normal flora of the skin is staph epidermidis, for example. So normal flora is found everywhere in the body. There are two exceptions. I mentioned it in class. Blood and CSF are sterile. They have no bacteria and no normal flora that we know of. You know, with our equipment getting better and better, who knows? We might find something, right? We used to think lungs were sterile. We used to think bladder was sterile, okay? We now know they're not really sterile, okay? You need to know the term septicemia, which means blood poisoning, okay? And sepsis is essentially a bacterial contamination of blood, okay? Where bacteria are in blood and growing in blood, okay? So it's a life-threatening condition resulting from body's response to these microorganisms or toxins in blood, okay? You need to know that. All right, let's switch gears. Okay, so we basically just talked about the adaptive immune response, the B cells, right? Active, passive, natural active, artificial active, natural passive, artificial passive, and then we talked about the T cells, and then we talked about the innate immunes, innate immune response, right? Which is essentially innate immune system, which is essentially what we're born with. Innate means born with, okay? Natale is, you know, anything NATE in medical literature will be something to do with birth. Neonatal unit, a unit where neonatal, newborn are made, right? So innate means you're born with it, okay? That's what we mentioned. All right, now let's talk a little bit about sanitation. Okay, let's talk about sanitation and why washing hands is so important and why being clean is so important. Okay, even though this is a little bit, this is supposed to be a very focused review of the class, let me tell you an interesting story. All right, no, I need to focus. Okay, let's leave the stories for the class because this is a review, right? We want to focus, and we'll do the stories in class, okay? And maybe show pictures. Well, we do show pictures. Okay, so just remember there, you all read this. There are 3 lines of defense against pathogens, right? But just know that obviously thoroughly cleaning the patient's room after discharge helps to limit the spread of disease by direct contact. What do I mean? You know, something's really dirty. I didn't know it's dirty. I put my hand on top of it. Is that a direct contact or what, right? So you can prevent it if rooms are clean. That's very important because hospital-acquired infections, what does that mean? There is a definition. What does a hospital-acquired infection mean? Or they may say healthcare associated. In the past, we used to say nosocomial. You can still see this word around. It's used regularly, okay? But they don't want to use fancy words anymore. They want to simplify it. So what does hospital-acquired infection mean? It means that the patient acquired some kind of an infection while receiving the medical treatment within 72 hours after admission. So you bring in a patient, he or she is not showing any signs of staphylococcal infection, right? And he or she gets it. That's nosocomial, okay? Patient did not have MRSA yesterday, 24 hours ago. Today, he's your patient. He has MRSA. That's a hospital-acquired infection, okay? So who usually gets these infections? Well, obviously not healthy cohort of patients. It would be patients with somewhat compromised immune system, right? Somewhat unhealthy patients, diabetes comes to mind, obesity, age, previous, you know, for example, if you're looking at airway diseases, you know, previous airway disease would be a very, very serious risk factor, right? So patients with compromised immune system are obviously more susceptible to these diseases, but also they're susceptible to diseases that normally are not seen in a healthy population, to bacteria or viruses or fungi that live in the environment totally normally, but then take that opportunity. That dude is not doing very well. Let me show him who is the boss. They take that opportunity. So we call them opportunistic infection. Okay, they take that opportunity that the patient is in the hospital, is not at his or her prime, not his or her best. Okay, opportunistic infections. Okay, know the meaning of the term cleaning. Cleaning just means like there's a bottle, take that bottle away. That's cleaning. Okay, literal, like taking, you know, objects and taking them out. That's the definition of cleaning. Notice that many definitions come from the time when hospitals had a different environment, right? I mean, sweeping the floor with a broom at some point was called cleaning, and it's called cleaning right now as well. Okay, so sanitization, on the other hand, is not just cleaning. It's a process that reduces the total number of bacterial contamination to the level that you can handle safely. Okay, so let's say we know that, for example, there are bacteria where 10 bacteria can cause diarrhea. Shigella, you know, I think I mentioned it earlier, right? Shigella, 10 bacteria can cause 10 diarrhea. So if you have only 5, then if you can bring it down from 11 to 15 to 5, you've done your sanitization. It's lower and can be handled safely, okay? Different bacteria, different diseases have their own level below which they're safe, okay? There is no like hard and fast rule. Generally speaking, our you know, cleaning methods cover them all, okay? Why is that important? For example, poor sanitation is a risk factor for in food industry, right? Patients may get hookworm. Patients may get tapeworm, and tapeworm, for example, is a risk factor for decreased B12, and decreased B12, as you know, can cause neurological abnormalities, can cause blood abnormalities. They may be anemia. Anemia is not a problem. What happens to a patient who has B12 for deficiency for a long time? Neurological damage, memory loss, very, very bad disease that's irreversible. You can't say, hey, let me give you some B12. Too late. You got to give B12 immediately. Very, very dangerous situation. Memory loss, loss of neurological control, you know, very, very dangerous. Something that can be treated very easily if you catch it early, okay? So tapeworm is transmitted by pork, by beef, by fish, okay, raw fish. Okay. So, and a hookworm is an infection that a patient may pick up from contaminated soil. But you got to be like walking barefoot. Okay, it's not like it's going to go through the shoes or something. Yeah, that's why walking on soil barefoot, you know, feels nice. We've all done that, enjoyed it. Just know the limitations. Okay, so so that was so cleaning was to prevent direct contact, right? And indirect contact means no direct human to human touch. Okay, no direct human to human contact means indirect contact transmission. Okay, how can you have that? Well, let's say I touch a bottle that has a particular group of bacteria sitting on there. Okay, I touch, and then I want to leave the room. Right, I'm gonna touch the handle, the door handle, and I'm gonna leave the room. Then the door handle will have those bacteria. Okay, let's say later on you are doing your core classes. Okay, you used an infected stethoscope. You use a fresh stethoscope on one patient, right? Then you forget to disinfect it, okay? And you go and auscultate, listen to the sounds, heart sounds, for example, of a patient who is right next, sharing a neighboring bed, right? So if you do not disinfect the stethoscope, what will happen? You're going to transfer bacteria or viruses, bacteria and viruses from patient A to patient B, right? That's fomite mediated disease transmission, okay? And it's indirect. The stethoscope is one important example. I have to admit the reality, I used to do that. Okay, it took me a while someone had to tell it to me till I realized it. You know, it was not stressed as much as it should have been, you know. Until I realized it, I must have passed on some bacteria. Hopefully nothing serious came out of that, but I was not the only one. In my defense, okay. But hey, these days it's stressed more often, okay? And students who are using stethoscopes are reminded to make sure they minimize the risk of transmission, okay? Alternatively, bless you, right? No, covering your nose or mouth. You want to cover it with your hands, right? So that afterwards you can walk around and shake hands, transmit it to everybody. Of course not. What we're told sneeze into your sleeve because we're not politicians. We don't go around elbowing, right? Others. It makes zero common sense to sneeze into your sleeve and then walk around like so. No, but it's a bad idea to sneeze into your hands because you're going to be touching things around you. So sleeve is the best. Okay, covering mouth and nose while sneezing prevents airborne transmission. That's also indirect. Airborne, you're going to pass it on because air comes out of your mouth or nose at a very high pressure. So it's a couple of quite a few feet that the droplets can carry viruses and bacteria. Okay, so think about and I'll stop right here. This is the last thing. I'll tell you how to remember things. Okay, so think about a steak. Okay, most people like steak. I love steaks. Okay, so think about a steak. Steak comes from it's part of a cow, right? Cow has 4 legs. It walks around. Cow has 4 legs. Okay, so now switch your gears. Steak, cow with 4 legs. Now let's talk about a car. Car has 4 wheels. Okay, car is called a vehicle. Okay, so any food is called a vehicle. Okay, what am I trying to say? Getting late. I've had a long day and a half, actually. So transmission via a common vehicle means what? Contaminated food, contaminated water, even contaminated blood. Blood may be a vehicle. Okay. So how do you remember it? Because who thinks of food as vehicle? So let's say I tell you, contaminated peanut butter from some distributor, right? It's a vehicle. And how do you remember it? Remember that steak example. Steak, cow has 4 legs, right? Cow is a vehicle. Why? No, the steak is a vehicle. Why? Because steak comes from a cow. Cow has 4 legs, and a car, which is called a vehicle, has 4 wheels. Okay, just a memory trick. It helps me. If you want to make something, remember, mnemonics don't have to be borrowed from someone. Okay, you got to make your own mnemonics at best, but sometimes good mnemonics stick. This is not the best mnemonic out there, but that's the one I came up with. Okay, so just remember that all the when you start working the core classes and in our labs, right? How to get rid of the cultures, biohazard disposal. It's part of your course. You need to know that all the cultures should be disposed of in the biohazard disposal. They're usually red containers. They have that sign, and that's how you do it. Okay. All right. I have nothing else to add here. I may stop as well. See you soon in class.